So it's no secret that in Dune Awakening, Ornithopters are probably the best vehicles in the entire game. As a matter of fact, the entirety of the end game is pretty much centered around Ornithopters, and PvP as well is also centered around Ornithopters. They are a crucial aspect of the game, and you need to know exactly how each of them operates because there's a lot of different versions of Ornithopters, and different versions are going to have vastly different stats, especially when you compare the higher tier ones to the lower tier ones, and that goes for just about every component. Ornithopters are going to be very modular in design, like all vehicles in Dune Awakening, and each module is going to have different stats which are going to affect the Ornithopters in different ways, and for that reason you can mix and match different modules together. You can use a Mark 6 wing on a Mark 5 Ornithopter, or you can use a Mark 6 engine on a Mark 4 Ornithopter, and vice versa. If you do know what each of these little modules do, you might be able to make a more informed decision and maybe save on a few resources, because not all modules are going to be super important. Some you might be able to get away with kind of downgrading and saving yourself a little bit of resources while still getting most of the benefits of the higher tier Ornithopters. So without further ado, let's discuss what all the Ornithopters do, their speeds, their agility, their rockets, which is also very important for PvP, and how they all compare up against each other, starting in at the Mark 4, which is going to be the weakest of the Ornithopters. This one's going to be the cheapest one to build, but it is also obviously going to be the weakest in terms of its overall performance. So let's first discuss what each of the modules are going to do. First of all, the Mark 4, it's going to have 1,000 armor across the board, so every component is going to have 1,000 armor. It's also going to have a fuel capacity of 300. However, fuel capacity isn't that important in Dune Awakening, since you're always going to be bringing a fuel cell or two in your backpack, which means you're going to be able to refuel them as it ends up draining on fuel. So it doesn't really matter. The stat is very much negligible, so don't worry too much about that one. So when it comes to the rockets on the Mark 4 Ornithopter, it is going to make your maximum glide speed go all the way down to 130 kilometers per hour, which is very, very slow. That is probably going to be the slowest movement speed in the entire game, even slower than the carrier Ornithopter. So be careful when it comes to rockets on the Mark 4. It is going to make you incredibly slow. So that's why I don't really recommend using rockets on the Mark 4. I would typically only use on the Mark 5 or above, since the Mark 4 does end up becoming incredibly slow compared to the others when you do end up having rockets on it. The engine is going to have a speed of 75 kilometers per hour, and the speed on the engine is going to refer to how fast you go when you are in the helicopter mode. So obviously these Ornithopters have two modes essentially. When you do end up flapping their wings, they are going to act as a helicopter, and when you do end up using the glide mode, they're going to act more of an airplane or a glider. When you talk about the engine speed at 75, it means how fast it's going to move while it's in the helicopter mode. The fuel efficiency of the helicopter is going to be 86, and then moving on to the wings, this is going to be when it's in gliding mode. That's what this is mostly going to refer to. The gliding speed is going to have a speed of 160. I actually find that when you're in game, it's actually the speeds are a bit faster in game than what the stats say under the crafting menu. When I fly the helicopter, it has a speed of 164 typically when you are in gliding mode, and that is a little bit misleading. I'm not sure why there's a discrepancy between the in-game and the stats on the crafting table. There's also going to be a turn rating of 8.0 with an agility rating of 6.0, and this is basically going to refer to how fast it can turn around and its overall mobility, which is quite slow. It's going to be a little bit of a sluggish one. This one is obviously going to be the weakest of them all, so it is going to be a little bit slower. Storage is also going to have 500 capacity. Now, the important thing about the storage is you cannot get upgraded storages. The storage is the same for both the Assault and the Scout. There is no storage of Mark 5 and Mark 6. So the storage used on the Mark 4 is also going to be the storage you can use on all the others. Just keep that in mind. And that's going to be a storage of only 500. Now, I'm not going to really get into all the other components because I find you're not going to really use them very much, since the thruster is going to take the same spot as your storage and your rockets, and those two are going to be the most important. You're pretty much never going to be flying without either rockets or the storage. So I'm not really going to talk too much about the thruster because it's mostly negligible on the Scout. It is more important when it comes to the Assault, but for the Scout, we're not going to really discuss too much about that. And the sensor module as well is not really that important. It's not going to give you that much benefit, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. So that is going to be the stats of the overall Mark 4. Now, the Mark 4, when you do end up using it, it's going to have a fairly slow climb speed, and this is going to be referring to how fast it's able to climb from when you get off the ground, and you're going to need to climb because you need to gain altitude in order to initiate the glide mode. That is basically going to give you your overall time period that it's going to take to get your maximum height, which is 750, and once you're at your maximum height, that's when you're going to be able to initiate the glide mode for the maximum efficiency. But again, it does end up taking quite a long time to reach this height. It's very slow to climb, and the movement speed while in the helicopter mode is also fairly slow, so keep that in mind as well. Also, it is going to be very sluggish when it comes to turning around. Like if you have to do quick maneuverability, like changing directions and turning around, that is going to be a bit slower on the Mark 4. Now, it's also important to note when it comes down to the gliding, with the Scouts are going to work a little bit differently than the Assault. To get the maximum speed without losing too much altitude, you're going to want to center the little dots in the center of your screen right in between the little triangle in the HUD there. That is going to give you the best in terms of its overall speed, as well as also not losing too much altitude. If you point it further down, you're not going to really gain any additional speed, but you are going to start losing altitude. Obviously, if you point it very far down, you will start gaining a lot of speed, but then you'll lose a lot of altitude, so it's not very efficient. If you want to get a nice, comfortable gliding speed with all the scout helicopters, you're going to want to keep that dot centered right in line with the bottom of that triangle you see in the center of the screen. Now, let's move on to the Mark 5 now. This one is going to be the next upgrade to the Mark 4, and this one's going to have a lot better stats. This one's actually going to be the one you probably see the most commonly in the world because a nice balance between it's not too expensive, but it also gives you pretty good stats overall. So the Mark 5 is going to have an armor rating of 1,250. This is going to be on every single piece of the Mark 5. It's also going to have a fuel capacity of 350, but again, this is not a very important stat. The engine rating is going to be a speed of 95. This is going to refer to how fast you can go while you're on the helicopter mode, and it's also going to have a power consumption of 27.8. Moving on to the PSU, it's going to have a temperature rating of 7.4 and a fuel efficiency of 82.5, and compared that to the Mark 4, the Mark 4 is going to have a temperature rating of 4.4 and a fuel efficiency of 86. Then the wings, this one's going to be a very important one. The glide speed is going to be 170. Once again, there's a bit of discrepancy here. When I do flight in game, I find the speed is going to be 172. That's going to be your kind of cruising altitude when you are in a Mark 5, and that is also going to give you a turn rating of 9.0 with an agility rating of 8.0. You'll definitely notice when you fly this, you will see that it is going to be able to turn a lot faster, and it's definitely going to have a much better time when it comes to maneuverability. Now, the rockets are going to start kicking in at Mark 5. There's no Mark 4 rockets, but there are rockets for Mark 5. So if you want to use rockets on Mark 4, you're going to have to use the Mark 5 or above. However, I wouldn't really recommend doing that because the Mark 4 is going to be a lot less health, so you will go down a lot faster. So I wouldn't really recommend using rockets on a Mark 4, but if you do have to, you're going to have to use the Mark 5 rockets on the Mark 4. Now, the rockets are going to have a damage of 164. They're going to also have an AoE radius of 6.0. Speaking of AoE radius, it's actually very important to note when you do end up shooting another vehicle, it's only going to damage the component that you end up hitting. So let's say you hit one of the wings, it won't damage all the wings, it's only going to damage the wing that actually gets hit. So that is actually a very important thing. So when it comes to AoE radius, this is mostly going to be in terms of like how far you can actually get that hit and how far you're going to be able to get that hit marker when you do end up shooting it, but it's not going to allow you to damage all the components with one single rocket. Right now, as it works in the game, is when you shoot, whatever component actually gets hit is going to be the one that actually takes the damage. There's also going to be a rate of fire of 0.25 and a heat per use of 7.5. The heat per use is actually quite important. One big thing about the Ornithopters is they do end up overheating quite quickly when you do end up using the rockets, so you can't really spam them as much as you might think. In terms of the speed penalty, this is going to be across the board with all the Scout Ornithopters. When you do end up putting the rockets, a module on them, regardless which rocket module you end up putting on it, whether it be 5 or 6, you're going to get a 20% speed reduction, and that is going to be across the board in terms of its glide speed and its speed in the helicopter mode. So you are going to have to make a pretty big speed penalty when you do end up using that. Now, how the Mark 5 is going to feel in terms of its movability, it's going to climb a lot faster, so it's going to be able to get to that maximum height a lot quicker, which is going to be great for you. That's going to allow you to kind of keep the speed going. It's also going to have a much better time when it comes to maneuverability. When you do end up flying the Mark 5, you will immediately notice that it is going to feel just a lot more snappy. It's going to move around a lot quicker, and it's definitely going to climb a lot faster, which is going to help out a lot. Then moving on to the highest tier of the Scouts, we're going to be taking a look at the Mark 6. Now, the Mark 6 is going to be the highest tier. It's also going to be taking the most resources, which is going to make use of plutonium, as well as spice melange, which is going to be something you're going to be able to mostly find in the deep desert. So this is something that you're going to be only making in the late game. Now, the Mark 6 is definitely going to be another very solid upgrade, with the armor rating being 1,500 across the board. So it's going to obviously have a lot more HP, making it harder to take down in PvP. It's also going to have a fuel capacity of 400, although this, again, is not really that important. You don't have to worry too much about the stat. When it comes to the engine, this is where you're going to start seeing big increases in its overall speed. Its speed is going to be 115, which means you're going to be able to travel at 115 kilometers per hour while you are on the helicopter mode, and that is a very big upgrade over the Mark 5. It's also going to have a power consumption of 29.7. Now, you are going to also be able to get to the maximum height very quickly, because this one can actually climb a lot faster than the others as well. This is going to be the fastest Ornithopter in the entire game, and this one is going to be able to output the highest amount of speed compared to all the other Ornithopters. The temperature rating on the PSU is going to be 10.0 with a fuel efficiency of 79. 159, and the wings are also going to give you a bit of a bump in speed. This one's going to be 180, although once again, when you do end up flying it, I do notice that the maximum speed is going to be 184 when you are in the glide mode, not actually 180. The turn rating is 10.0, with the agility rating also going to be 10.0 on the Mark 6, and this is going to give you a very fast moving Ornithopter. It's actually quite difficult to even move this around in the base because it moves so fast. It's actually difficult to land it precisely. It actually feels like a dragonfly when you end up flying it because of how fast it moves. It's very quickly able to turn around as well, allowing you to change directions mid-flight very quickly, assuming you are in the helicopter mode, or switch to the helicopter mode at least, and it is going to give you the best performance in terms of its overall maneuverability and agility. Then moving on to the rockets, it's also going to be a very big upgrade moving on to the Mark 6 with a damage of 259, which is very respectable for a Scout Ornithopter, and an AoE radius of 6.0 with a fire rate of 0.25, I believe that is the same, and heat per shot of 5.0, and once again a movement speed penalty of 20% across the board when you do end up having that rocket attached. So in an overall feel of the Mark 6, again, it's going to be a very fast Ornithopter. It's going to be very expensive to make those, so it is a bit risky to take this one out into the deep desert if you don't have resources to replace it, because it is going to definitely require quite a lot of resources to craft. But when you do end up crafting it, you are going to be rewarded with a very fast Ornithopter. It is the fastest in the entire game, and it is going to be very difficult for enemies to keep up with you, especially if they have rockets on theirs, since this is going to move a lot faster. Now, moving on to the assault category of Ornithopter, these are going to be the big brother to the Scout Ornithopters. They are typically going to end up moving a lot slower, but they are going to obviously offer a bit more in terms of their storage capacity, in terms of their module slots that you can put on them, and also having much stronger rockets when you end up using them for PvP. So the assault helicopters are going to have a couple of quirks which are going to differentiate them. One of them is going to be obviously the size. It also can take a passenger, so that can be nice. You do have some space for someone else. And let's start off with the armor rating. It's going to be exactly the same as the Mark 5 Scout. There's going to be no Mark 4 for the assault. You're going to only be able to start at Mark 5, and that's going to have an armor rating of 1250. So in terms of its survivability, it's more or less the same as the Mark 5 Scout counterpart. Since the Mark 5 assault does have a few more wings, as it's going to have 6 wings rather than 4 wings, there are going to be more components that may need to be broken or damaged in order to take it down. So it may have a little bit more survivability depending how the rockets end up hitting. Otherwise, it is going to take the same amount of damage to take down each individual component. However, there are going to be a bit more components to damage, so that might keep you alive for a little bit longer. The fuel capacity is also going to be a very big upgrade at 750, but again, fuel capacity is not really a big deal. The engine speed is only going to be 90 kilometers per hour with a power consumption of 44.8. This is going to be a little bit on the slower side, but again, the Assault Ornithopter is not built for speed. It's mostly built either for big storage or for PvP combat, so you're obviously going to take a little bit of a hit when it comes to your speed. The PSU rating is 6.1 with a fuel efficiency of 82.5, and the wings are going to give you a glide speed of 150 kilometers per hour, although it's more like 152 or 154 kilometers per hour in actual practice. The turn rating is quite sluggish. It's going to be 4.0 with an agility rating of 3.0, so a little bit slow on the movement speed when it comes to the wings. It is going to feel a lot slower and a lot clunkier. Taking off and turning around and whatnot is definitely going to be much slower than the Scout Ornithopter. You're definitely going to feel it when you get in the assault helicopter. It's going to feel a lot bulkier when you do end up flying it. Another very important thing to note when it comes to the glide speed of the assault helicopter, it's not going to operate the same way as the Scout. When you do end up using the Scout, you will notice with the Scout, when it comes to the best glide strategy, you're going to want to keep the center dot right at the base of the little pointy triangle in the middle of your screen. However, when it comes to the assault, you're going to have to turn that down a little bit. You're going to have to send it down a couple of notches below the triangle in order to maintain that glide speed. And in doing so, you're going to obviously lose altitude a lot faster than the Scout. So you're going to be slower, and you're also going to lose altitude faster. So that's going to make moving around the map a lot slower with the assault, and you're going to have to make more trips up to gain altitude as you would compare to the Scout. That is obviously going to be the penalty for using the more heavy Ornithopter. Then we're going to be moving on to the storage. It's going to be 1,000 kilograms, and this is going to be across both of the assault helicopters. There's no upgrades to storage capacity, so it's going to be 1,000 across the board, similar to how it is on the Scout Ornithopters. Then when it comes to the rockets are going to be quite powerful. 248 on the Mark 5, which which is very similar to the Mark 6 Scout. This is going to give you 248 damage per hit with an AoE radius of 7.0 and a rate of fire of 0.4. You'll notice that the Assault Ornithopter is going to have a rate of fire which is a bit higher than those of the Scout Ornithopters. However, with this extra rate of fire, you're also going to notice that there's going to be a lot more heat buildup because your heat per shot is going to be 9.5. So you are going to be able to potentially shoot a little bit less shots before you end up overheating when it comes to the Assault. Your speed is going to be also reduced when you do end up using rockets on the Assault. However, it's not going to be as much of a speed reduction as compared to the Scout Ornithopters thanks to the latest patch, which is going to make the speed reduction only 10% rather than 20%, so you don't lose that much in terms of your overall speed. Now, the nice thing about the Assault, you can also use more modules without sacrificing any important ones, so you can actually use a thruster with things like storage or rockets, and that is going to allow you to use two very important modules. Now, the thruster is going to have some interesting quirks about it. It is going to make you essentially move faster while you're in the helicopter mode, and this is going to be especially useful when it comes to climbing altitude. That's what you pretty much want to use the thrusters for when it comes to the Assault, is to gain altitude, not to go faster while you are in gliding mode. As far as I can tell, there is no speed boost when it comes to gliding mode. You are still going to be capped at whatever your Assault Ornithopter is going to be at, so you're not going to be able to glide faster by using the thruster. So use the thruster only to gain altitude. If you are going to be close to the ground, you want to quickly go up again, that's when you use the thruster, but be careful, it's going to overheat very quickly. The thruster rating is going to be a rating of 8.2. The glide rating is going to be a rating of 7.9. I'm not sure what this means by glide rating because once again, from my testing, you don't get any extra speed when you do end up using the thrusting glide mode. It is mostly going to be just there to gain altitude and get up faster. The extra heat is going to be a rating of 150 and the power consumption is going to be a rating of 89.7 per second. So overall, when you do end up using the Mark 5 Assault Ornithopter, you are going to immediately notice it's going to feel a lot clunky. It's going to take off slower. It's going to turn around slower. However, when you do want to transport bigger amounts of resources, the extra storage capacity from 500 to 1,000 is very nice. And the rockets doing more damage is also going to be quite valuable when it comes to PvP. However, because of the movement speed penalty, it is going to be a lot harder to fly away in terms of PvP. So if you ever need to get away and you have rockets on, if your opponent is using a Scout, they are going to be able to chase you down a lot easier if you're on PvP against Scout Ornithopters, since they might not do as much damage as you, but they definitely can outpace you in terms of their overall movement speed. So watch out for that. Then moving on to the Mark 6 Assault Ornithopter. This one is going to have an armor of 1,500. Again, that is going to be on all components. Fuel capacity is going to be 850, which once again doesn't really matter that much. The PSU is going to have a temperature rating of 10.0 with a fuel efficiency of 79%. And the wing speed is going to give you 160, which in my experience is more like 164 when you are in the optimal glide speed. The turn rating is also going to be a bit higher at a 5.0 rating with the agility rating of 4.0. And you're going to notice that this will definitely feel a lot faster and will feel less clunky than the Mark 5. It is quite a noticeable difference jumping from a Mark 5 to a Mark 6. The rockets are going to also do significantly more damage. With the highest damage of all the rockets in the aircraft space, this one is going to have a damage of 391 per rocket, which is significantly higher than that of the Mark 5. And it's also going to be significantly higher than that of even the Mark 6 on the Scout Ornithopter. The AoE radius is going to be 7.0 with a rate of fire of 0.4 and a heat per shot of 7. And it is also going to have a 10% speed reduction. So you are going to obviously move a little bit slow when you are using rockets. The thrusters are also going to be quite a nice upgrade coming in from the Mark 6 compared to the Mark 5. The thruster rating is 10.0 with the thruster glide rating of 8.6. Once again, same situation here. You're going to want to use the thrusters only to gain altitude, not to try gain glide speed. The extra heat buildup is going to be 150 with the power consumption of 96.1. And that is going to be all of the Assault Ornithopters. The last one left is going to be the Carrier Ornithopter, but since there is nothing to compare it to, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of its overall speed. It is going to give you a glide speed of typically about 140 whilst you're in the glide speed. It's also going to end up being a lot slower than all the other Ornithopters. You're not going to be able to put really any modules other than the thrust on it, so you can't put storage on it, you can't put rockets on it. It's going to be pretty much a Mark 6 counterpart. There is no earlier versions of the Carrier. You can use it to pick up vehicles. It's one of its nice quirks, is it can be used to actually carry and transport other vehicles, which is going to be quite important if you want to use it as a way to transport the sandcrawl in the deep desert. However, it is going to be a very slow Ornithopter, definitely not recommended for general use. This is pretty much exclusively only going to be used to transport vehicles, since it is going to have terrible fuel consumption. You have to use a lot of fuel to keep this thing going. It's also going to be very slow. It's going to have terrible agility and maneuverability, and it's overall going to feel pretty bad compared to the others. But it does have one very big benefit, and that it's so big that it can actually transport other vehicles, which is pretty much the only reason you should be ever using the carrier Ornithopter. And you should pretty much only use this as well if you are in a big team, because if you go out alone with this, you are going to be a sitting duck since you're so slow compared to other Ornithopters. This one is actually the slowest Ornithopter in the entire game, and that is going to make your life quite bad. It is very much worth noting that, again, since it's a modular design, you can potentially make use of different components with different versions. So you can use maybe the chassis of a Mark IV, but maybe you want to have the wings and the engine of a Mark VI in order to get more movement speed, since the chassis doesn't really provide much except for maybe a bit more fuel capacity, which is not very important. So you could end up replacing certain components that aren't as important. Things like the cockpit, the tail component, the hull, the chassis, they're not really going to offer you anything other than extra armor. So you could potentially use lower tier versions of that. But whereas things are going to be more important when it comes to higher tier versions, things like the engine, things like the wings, maybe even the PSU or the rockets, those are going to be a lot more valuable when it comes to the higher tiers. So if you do want to save on some resources, you could potentially maybe use some slightly cheaper versions of certain components. You will lose a little bit of armor, but you will be able to get a lot more in terms of your resources and be able to save out of that without losing too much of the feel of the Ornithopter overall. In terms of which Ornithopters I recommend using at the most, I think the Mark Vs are going to give you the best value for your resources. The Mark IV is going to be something for the early game. You know, it's great for when you first get off the ground and start using Ornithopter, which is fine. But after that, you want to quickly start moving to the Mark V. The Mark VIs I would only use in the very late game if you have plenty of resources. Otherwise, you don't want to make use of them too often, because if you lose them, it's going to feel really bad since they are quite expensive. But they are definitely a big upgrade. But again, they are a very expensive one. So overall, I think the best value, the best all-purpose you can get is using the Mark Vs. If you do lose them, they're not the end of the world. They're not that expensive, and you can replace them fairly easily, especially when you're on the late game. So overall, my overall recommendation is stick to the Mark Vs unless you have a lot of extra resources. Then go ahead and start transitioning to the Mark VIs. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comment section below if you learned anything, and if you know any other tips or tricks about the Ornithopters that I might have missed. I'd love to find out. Otherwise, I'll see you again next time. Take care, everyone, and bye-bye.